So I'm going to start with something I've never done before, which is reading somebody else's Dharma. And that somebody else was one of my teachers, Steph Barragato. And he has a little book online that is called Zen Mishimi, Mishimi. And it's just there. Treetop Zen Center has it posted. And so I encourage all of you to go and read this book. It's a wonderful little book. And it really expresses Steph's Zen in a beautiful way. So I'm going to read you the two initial passages in the book. If I figure out how to make all of you go away, there you are. Okay, and gonna get the book open here. There it is. Okay. All right. So, like this. I'm sorry. Oh, there. That's as good as I'm going to get it. I can see you folks more or less, and I can see the book more or less. So that word Zen Mishimi means the little way of Zen, the little way of Zen. And I would say that was Steph's fundamental way, the little way. And that was a concept that he got initially not from an actual Zen teacher, but from a Catholic saint, Saint Therese of Lisieux. Mary Jo, you can correct my pronunciation if you'd like. I did all right. Okay, and she was a marvelous figure, and died very young. She was like 24 years old when she died. But the form of her devotion was very inspirational to both Steph and Margaret. And so this book that he wrote, this little pamphlet of book, is about the little way of Zen. And so this section is the little way of Chow Cho. Now, Chow Cho is a teacher whose names you've probably heard. Those of you who are doing koan study, you encounter him every so often. And I'm not going to say much more about who he is because Steph tells it here, and then we can talk a little bit about it. The little Zen way is beautifully expressed by Chow Cho in a poem he wrote and in 3 early koans. The koans are, Who is Your Master? Everyday Mind Ruined and Homeless, and another version of this koan, The Way, What Is It? These koans illuminate and define Chow Cho. He is a simple, modest, and kind man, a man who knows his own self and is not timid to present it at appropriate times, yet he does not push himself forward in order to gain fame, glory, or recognition. A man who teaches in simple language, not fettered with Buddhist cliches, language that does not begin or end with words. Silence is also the language of Chow Cho. A man who is not in figura or the presentation he makes. He is not interested in fine robes, brocade rakusus, silk cases, fancy furniture. A man who takes no pride in his accomplishments or achievements. He is open to the learning he can receive from others, no matter who they may be, male, female, young or old, Buddhist or non-Buddhist. Whoever and whatever can teach him, he will receive their learning. And likewise, he is willing to teach anyone who wants to learn from him. He is not interested in theological speculation. He will not tolerate any form of sham and exposes it as such directly and immediately. However, he does it with kindness. No 30 blows from Chaucho, no shouting of obscenities. This is Chaucho. I hope you get to know, respect, and love him as I do. You'll be enriched by this great Zen master. Here is his poem. The cock crows in the early morning. Sadly, as I rise, I see how worn out I am. I haven't a belt or a shirt, just the semblance of a robe. My loincloth has no seat, my pants no opening. On my head are 3 or 5 pecks of gray ashes. Originally intended to practice to help save others, who would have suspected that instead I would become a fool? It's such a wonderful verse. I'm going to read it again. The cock crows in the early morning. Sadly, I see as I rise how worn out I am. I haven't a belt or a shirt, just the semblance of a robe. My loincloth has no seat, my pants no opening. On my head are 3 or 5 pecks of gray ashes. Originally, I intended to practice to help save others. Who would have suspected that instead I would become a fool? The images in this poem are few and simple. A cock crowing, a belt, a shirt, a robe, a loincloth, a pair of pants, a head, and 3 or 5 pecks of gray ashes upon that head. Just one simple yet wonderful metaphor, those ashes for hair, a few gray ones on a balding head. The images are low-level abstractions. They are common every day. The only thing uncommon to our 20th century thinking is the loincloth, for which we could substitute a torn pair of underpants, probably of the brief variety, and probably old, torn, and a little soiled. Altogether, they portray a shabby old man in tattered clothes, utmost simplicity, utmost poverty. And yet, this is the self-portrait of perhaps the greatest Zen master of all time. This portrait reminds me of the self-deprecating self-portraits of Rembrandt as an old man. Chaucho never engaged in fundraising for his little Sangha, Kuan Yin Monastery, where he lived the last 20 years of his life. When a chair broke, he took a piece of wood from the firewood pile and used it as replacement. He would not allow his students to do better. If the roof leaked, it leaked. If the walls were drafty, there was little food available. Life at Kuan Yin Monastery must have been severe. And yet, when one considers the feeling of the language of the koans involving Chaucho, there is undeniable humor there. There is no sense of the grim, dry aesthetic. This man is vibrant and joyous. The metaphor of the 3 or 5 pecks of ashes on his head gives a hint of this humor. This poem was probably written in Chaucho's later years. The gray ashes indicate that. So in a way, the poem may be Chaucho's summing up of his life, a man who began life with the pretensions of being a bodhisattva and ends realizing that he is a poor, shabby old fool. No opening for his pants, no seat on his loincloth. It is said that Chaucho always spoke softly. How unlike some of his great peers, Matsu, Linchi, and others who shouted and raged and stormed. Chaucho was just a whisper of a Zen priest, just a whisper of the Dharma. Chaucho is truly poor in body and spirit, a man whose way is quiet, non-dramatic, little, the way of little things, the way of insignificance, of being small, of being, as Emily Dickinson says, nobody. I'm nobody. Who are you? Are you nobody too? Then there's a pair of us. Don't tell. They'd advertise, you know. How dreary to be somebody. How public, like a frog. Tell no one's name the livelong June to an admiring bog. In the koan Everyday Mind, Ruined and Homeless, Chao Cho asked Nanchuan, what is the way? And this is the koan. Your everyday mind is the way. Can I reach it? If you try to reach it, you will miss it. If I don't try to reach it, how will I know it? The way has nothing to do with knowing or not knowing. Knowing is deluded consciousness, not knowing it is non-differentiation. When you enter the real way without doubt, it will be like the great sky, like vastness itself. How could it be right to argue with oneself whether it is right or wrong? Now that was Nanchuan was Chao Cho's teacher, also a wonderful, wonderful teacher, in spite of having killed the cat. So hearing this, Chao Cho experienced a deep realization. He was 17 years old. His description of the experience was, suddenly I was ruined and homeless. Then he went to the precept-giving altar at the Shaolin Monastery on Sung Mountain, where Bodhidharma had lived for 9 years and where he received the precepts. Afterwards, he returned to Nanchuan's monastery. The images of the koan are the ordinary, the little things, the low-level abstractions. Way, aim, mist, blindly, blankness, space, clear. The verb is, aim, misses, know. Said, has, reached, forced, was awakened. That's it. Everyday language. Everyday words. No Shakespearean heights here. These are the words and the language of a 5-year-old. Everyone can understand these words, no hidden meanings. And yet, like Chao Cho, by aiming, we miss, and we all miss. We all enter the Daisan room with the intention of either making a Kensho illuminating presentation or receiving a Kensho illuminating teaching. We all aim high. We think we can reach the way, crack the heart of the koan with our understanding, with our knowledge, with our answers. We have 100 answers, 100 answers for Mu. We reach for the moon. Oscar Wilde, in one of his quips, says, to do nothing is the most difficult thing in the world, the most difficult and the most intellectual. He was wrong. It's not difficult to do nothing, and by no means intellectual. The difficulty is trying to make something out of nothing. That's where the intellectual creeps in. It's crazy, and we do it all the time. Take the self. Shakyamuni teaches us that the self is a bundle of what he calls heaps or aggregates. These heaps correspond to our senses and the objects of perception of these senses. These heaps are our seeing, feeling, hearing, touching, tasting, et al. Are changing constantly. There is nothing static about any of them. Our eyesight is constantly changing. Our hearing constantly changes, etc. This bundle that we call the self has nothing about it that we can really pin down and say, hey, that's it. That's myself. What's myself? Is it my seeing, my hearing, my feeling, my nose, my hand, my eyes, my liver, my pelvis, my vagina, my penis? Or attempt to find the self is fruitless intellectual exercise, for there is no self with a capital S. There is nothing we can rely on. There is nothing there. Can we trust our eyes to really see what we see? Ask 5 people who see the same thing to tell you what they saw, and you get 5 different versions. The same is true of all of our senses. The same is true of language. We confuse the subject or object of our words with the words themselves. No matter how often we say the words apple pie, we will not satisfy our hunger for apple pie. No matter how often we say the word water, we will never quench our thirst. We need to realize and understand that words are pointers and unreliable ones at that. They are symbols of things that actually have no existence. They point to that which is nothing. You see how ridiculous it gets? Can I reach it? If you try to reach it, you will miss it. That's the heart of this koan. All our efforts are useless. All our answers miss. All of our knowledge is useless. All of our knowledge misses. All of our efforts, knowledge, and answers will not touch or force it in any way. Understanding this, Chaucho says that he has lost his bearings. He is now without a place. No nail to hang his cloak on. No nail to hang his preconceptions on. Homeless, ruined. Being so, he became the bright, full moon. The way of Chaucho is the way of ordinary, everyday mind. It is the little way of Zen. And each of us has an ordinary mind. Zen is for us. We are able to experience the fullness of Zen in our ordinariness, in our everyday thoughts, words, and acts. Like Therese and Chaucho, we do the little things, washing dishes, making the bed, cooking the soup, making the pizza, chopping firewood, bowing across the guts of a violin, spinning the potter's wheel, painting a wall, mowing the lawn, shoveling snow, which we've had to do way too much of lately. And whatever we do, Zen happens. We are able to experience the fullness and completeness of Zen. Thank you. A little introduction to Chaucho and a little introduction to Steph Barragato and his teaching. Several people here, quite a few people here actually, did study with Steph when he was alive. And it was just an enormous loss. It's interesting because as far as I'm concerned, both Steph and Margaret were giants of Zen in this time. Margaret was I consider her a spiritual genius. I mean, not only was she a Zen teacher, but she was right near the end of her life a practicing Catholic. She had a master's of divinity and a PhD in theology, and she was on the faculty of the Bangor Theological Seminary, where she taught Buddhist Christian dialogue. They were both extraordinary people. And yet, in the Zen world, they are obscure. If you went to any major Zen center in this country, with the possible exception of Yonkers, where they lived in Bernie Glassman's community for a while, and maybe some people still alive who remember them, no one's going to know their names, And I suspect that was true of Chaucho in his lifetime. He wasn't one, the big teachers like he mentioned Matsu had 1,500 students, and was known therefore all over China. Chaucho had maybe a dozen students, So it's interesting. It's something very interesting about our perceptions and our culture and who we elevate and who we ignore, often much to our loss.
I'm coming up with a hilarious scene that happened at each retreat, we would end up in Steph's office doing
Mary
all,
Jo, can you talk just a little bit louder?
let's see, let me try.
Okay.
Is that better? Can you
Well,
hear
go
me?
ahead. Go ahead. Yeah, Susan says yes, good. So
Okay. We would end up in Steph's office doing the bows to the ancestors, which who were all their portraits, all their pictures were on the wall. And his office was this tiny room that contained Steph and a vibraphone. And depending on how many people were at the retreat, invariably somebody was doing their bows and getting up because it's a lot of bowing and up and down and hitting their head on the vibraphone. And Steph would just sort of smile genially and watch it all happen. It was pretty crazy.
yeah, when we started in Orono with them, we did the retreats right in their home. And so their sunroom was the Zendo, and we slept in their living room kind of thing. And it was wonderful. It was so intimate. It was wonderful.
Do you think a mistake was made, Peter, in the um, sort of larger practice centers? Do you think that there's an advantage to being small?
I think there's absolutely is an advantage. You know, at a big place like, I won't say a name of a place, but a big place that has like 250 students, you're lucky to get dice on a couple of times a year. You know, in the course of a retreat, back with Steph and Margaret, if it was a 7 day retreat, you had dice on 14, 15 times more than you'd have in, 5 years in a big practice center. And so I believe that, among other things, that and the intimacy with the Sangha. Everybody was close. Everybody became good friends, you know. And in a big place, it's not even the same people sitting with you twice. You know, every time you come, there's a different bunch of people and so on. You just can't develop that intimacy. Um, and so it's a really good question, man. And I not only think, our culture is so geared towards the dramatic, the big, so people they've heard of Great Vow Monastery, they've heard of Zen Mountain Monastery, they've heard of Zen Center of Los Angeles, blah blah blah, and those places therefore draw a lot of energy and a lot of attention. But I personally believe that some of the best Zen is happening in obscurity.
Yeah. One wonders if it's almost a precondition.
In what sense?
Well, that you know, if you are out there and you're a celebrity, we'll call you a Zen celebrity. Um, whether it detracts from your dharma necessarily.
Yeah, it's a good question, and that I don't know the answer to because I'm not a Zen celebrity, and and I'm very glad of that. I'm very glad of that. I guess I've clearly Steph has rubbed off on me and shouts out to some extent. You know, but there's a saying, it takes a steady hand to hold a full cup. So I think the more celebrity a person has, the more challenging it is to keep their ego aligned and to remain authentic and not become their own legend. I think again, it's a challenge I don't have to face, but I can really see where that would be a whole different set of problems and challenges.
I think this message, this koan for me, and you're talking about the little way of Chow Chow. Um, I think I would sum up that this is the one of the 5 S's, and that would be simplicity. Um, and I think simplicity is something that benefits our very busy lives these days because it's just so easy to complicate it. And I think what this says is do your practice, live your life, be as simple as you can be. Keep it all simple. So I like that message. And not to embarrass you, Peter, but you're an excellent person to deliver the message.
Yeah, thank you. I'm about to go online to talk to a large group of people as a Zen celebrity. So anyway, yeah, but the other thing, back to Matt's point, I think, Steph and Daido had a kind of strange relation. Daido Roshi, the teacher at Zen Mountain Monastery, and where the Barragatos were living in New York, they were in Kerhonkson, which wasn't that far away from Zen Mountain Monastery, and both Daido and Steph were Italian American, so I imagine they had some connection there. But they were such different men. They were just like polar opposites. But one of the things, Steph, they had a kind of a funny, grudging friendship. But Steph told me was that what Daido told him was Daido said he has to get up every day and raise money. That big monastery was such a huge machine, such a huge mouth to feed, that fundraising was his major occupation. So I think, and the same was true with Bernie Glassman in Yonkers. Steph was at ZCLA with Bernie under Maizumi Roshi, and when Bernie decided to come east to Yonkers to teach, Maizumi sent Steph with him to be his fundraiser. And at some level, Steph felt that he had been deprived because he was so busy fundraising, he couldn't sit the retreats. And he and Bernie would get together on a park bench someplace in Manhattan or whatever and do their daishan. But Bernie almost literally didn't have the time to sit with Steph for daishan. So I think there's a lot of once money gets in the picture, it really screws everything up, I think. So therefore, I'm going to help liberate you all. Please send me all your money. And I will make sure that it's used with good karma. Everybody have a good day, and glad to see you all.